Welcome to a Rise and Shine podcast. This is Sherry, and today I'm going to be talking about finding balance and looking at who's responsible in relationships, and particularly stemming from the original relationship in a trauma bond and in a relationship where there's a perpetrator victim. Otherwise known as a survivor. And as a survivor, I've been learning to find balance between my responsibility and other people's responsibilities. And let me make this clear at the beginning of this podcast that the only person responsible when there's abuse occurring or has occurred is the person who is older, has power and control over the other person. And this podcast is about taking the shame and the blame and the guilt off of the survivor and putting it where it actually belongs. As a survivor, I know from my own experience and from others who I have listened to over the years that we tend to take on the blame, guilt, responsibility, and shame for the abuse that has occurred to us. I want to make this absolutely clear and with much clarity that the abuse is never, and I repeat, never, the child, teen, young adult, or even an elderly person's fault. The person that chooses to abuse is responsible. And that takes a lot of time to transfer that responsibility that we take on as children from ourselves and away from us. And it's a process. It can take years, it can take months, weeks. And when we have breakthroughs, it can take days sometimes, or even during a therapy session. It can be amazing how quickly, when we realize the truth about abuse and the power and position that an abuser holds over us, when we realize that we were powerless over what happened. Recently, I've been dealing with transferring the responsibility off of myself in regard to my mother abusing me. And I can honestly say it was one of the hardest things for me to do. Number one, to take the responsibility off of myself and to face the truth about what she had done to me, because mothers have this, in my opinion, and I think this is true for a lot of survivors, it's like mothers are supposed to be nurturers and protectors and be the people in our lives that help us, not harm us. And so a lot of what happened with me was to have to admit, yes, my mother was very abusive and neglectful, and which is just as bad when you don't get something as when you do get harm, because it's harmful. Like, for instance, needing to go to the doctor and not being taken to the doctor, or needing to have help and instead being blamed for the abuse. My mother found my dad abusing me sexually and blamed me. And so, anyway, during my one of my therapy sessions, I was able to really look at how my mother was responsible for what she chose to do and what she chose not to do for me as I was growing up. And every decision that was made, regardless of the fact that she had been abused, also was made by her and was responsible. uh, The responsibility for that was hers, not mine. And I can understand also that in turn, prior to my mother abusing me, her mother also had abused her, but that does not excuse what she did to me. It just helped me to understand it better. So, anyway, in my therapy session, I was able to take the responsibility for what was done to me off of my shoulders and off of myself. And I had lived with many, many years of self hatred, self condemnation, just really like loathing myself for what not only she had done, but other abusers as well. But I really feel like it was one of the hardest things that I did to actually put the responsibility fully onto her and not myself. It was painful. I felt like it was easier for me to believe that I was bad and I was the one responsible than it was to realize that my mother, who represented a person that could have, should have, but didn't protect me, was the one that harmed me. In doing that, I was able to really look at the truth. And the truth is what sets us free. As painful as it is the truth about our situation as children who have had abuse, trauma, neglect, whether it's emotional, mental, physical, sexual, or spiritual. When we are children, it's normal, and a child is egocentric. It's normal to put the blame onto ourselves because it's too hard at the time to believe that a person that is supposed to love us and be there for us is the one that's harming us. And I think we can only handle as adults one perpetrator at a time. For me, I and maybe this is true for you as well. It's like we deal with the things that are hard, but in some ways easier to deal with. For instance, like dealing with physical abuse or dealing with emotional abuse is easier, even though that's hard in itself. It's easier than dealing with sexual abuse or dealing with ritual abuse or mind control, especially depending on the person. If it's a parent, that makes it a lot harder. Anyway, I've been looking at the fact and thinking a lot about this and learning that in every relationship, there's two people. And during abuse, the lines get blurred between those two people or between the survivor and maybe multiple people, which can be the case and was in mine, in my life, in my abuse. So the lines between myself and, if you're a survivor listening, between you and a perpetrator or perpetrators gets blurred. It's like, where do I begin? Who am I? Because with dissociation, it's like I had to believe this isn't really happening to me. And if you have DID, your mind was not capable of realizing that this is really happening to me. So in our mind, we create parts. This is happening to this part of me or this person as if it's separate from us. And so in doing that, You put that together with the fact that a child is egocentric and blames themselves anyway, and it's like the perpetrator also is someone who we can create parts inside of us that are like our perpetrator, and then are condemning us for remembering or condemning us for telling, because we know that that perpetrator would not want us to speak or talk about what happened. So there's a lot involved, but as I have found the different parts of me and connected with them, the lines have gotten a lot more clear between who I am and who other people are. For instance, like with the relationship with my mother, there were no boundaries. And in any abuse situation, the boundaries that we should have had were non-existent. So our abusers did anything that they wanted to us whenever they wanted to. And so our boundaries were not respected. We were violated, and that's all on them. Those abusers are the only people that are responsible for the abuse that was done. But because the lines between an abuser and a survivor get so blurred, I think of the trauma bond that there is, because during abuse, to survive, I had to attach to my dad or my mom or the people that were abusing me, because they were all I had. There was no one that was helping me. There was no one to come to my rescue. And so, out of the attachment needs that I had, or any person has as a child, we have to believe in our mind that that person really loves us, and we have to like mentally go away from what's happening, but like get anything that we can as far as closeness, or because when abuse is happening, there's an intimacy with that, and there is closeness, there's touching, there's sometimes some of the things that are going on feel good, and some of the things may be things that we want, deeply need, like feeling closeness, like it doesn't always start out with going right to the worst of the worst. That person, like my father, like my mother, they were people that I dearly loved and wanted to love me. I wanted them to love me. And so when I was shown affection or attention, that part of it felt wonderful and good, and could have been if that's where it would have stopped. But when that parent violates the private parts of our body and exploits the fact that we need them and that we would want them to show us love and affection, that's when it gets all messed up and twisted, because then it's like, well, I must have wanted this other stuff to happen because I wanted that person in my life to show me love and affection. But that is a normal need that all of us have. But those lines get blurred. Well, for one thing, when there's sexual stimulation, that is something that causes good feelings, as well as, no, I don't want this to happen because this feels wrong. And this doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't feel good that my dad or my mom or someone else is doing these things to me. There, it feels like we're the ones doing something wrong, when in all actuality, that perpetrator, that abuser, is the one that's responsible doing something wrong. but because of the connecting involved and because of the relationship, those lines are blurred and the trauma bond is there, and it can feel like hate or a love relationship that's very, very trying to think of the word I want to use, but a bond that feels like what should have only been for like two consenting adults. And there's a close connection when we have sex with someone as an adult. But when it's abusive and the abuser uses the power and control that they have over the child or teen or adult, whatever the case is, that's where it's like what feels like normal until you realize, well, this is not a normal thing, but this is what I experienced. So I want to talk a little bit about how, like I said earlier, in every relationship, there's two people. Once we've been abused, it's hard then to separate being a victim and walking around carrying blame for everything else in our life from that point on, which can happen, or never taking on the blame for anything and walking around feeling like I don't have to be responsible for anything because of blah, 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 whatever the excuse is. So finding that balance takes time, and it takes looking within yourself and finding out that you are a person separate from your abuser, finding out that you have your own identity, finding out that have you are no longer powerless over everything, and that you can make choices, and that you do have your own thoughts, feelings, beliefs, wants, desires, and finding out what those are. And it takes a lot of separating out, like, what in the world is mine and what in the world belongs to the other person. And so, in a healthy relationship, which I'm thankful I have relationships that are healthier, there is respect, there is a separation between the two people, and there are boundaries that are being respected, being able to set boundaries, saying, I like this, but I don't like that. Being able to really look at when I'm interacting with another person, what is my responsibility and what is their responsibility? Well, one of the first things that helped me in therapy was to identify feelings, my own feelings and emotions, and then be able to feel them, but then also be able to own them as mine, because I did not and was not allowed to feel during abuse. And with programming and mind control, there is the conditioning that tells me or you what to do, how to feel, how to do it, when to do it. And that's what you have to follow, is what you're told, or there's going to be consequences and parts get tortured or punished, and or other people get tortured, punished, killed, whatever the case is. And so it's very important to be able to get to your own emotions and feelings, and then be able to realize that it's okay to feel, it's okay to have feelings, and be able to share them like with support people, therapy people, professionals that will help you to um, be able to find yourself and find out that you are a separate person and you do have thoughts. Your rights, oh my gosh, rights were so violated that it's very important to realize that what was done to you or to me was wrong in the first place, but also to take that responsibility off of yourself that no, this was not my fault. This was the other person's fault. And then as you work with relationships, which is work, because both people have feelings, both people have their own thoughts, both people have the right to have their needs met and to have and to set boundaries, to be respected, to be accepted and loved and shown compassion. And so when you're moving into healthier relationships, um, and another thing is to know that I matter and they matter too. But when there's, like I said, there's two people in every relationship and the lines have gotten blurred. So for us survivors, we can practice with safe, healthy people or healthier people and be able to realize, okay, I'm separate from this person. So everything about the other person is theirs. The thoughts they have are theirs. The opinions they have are theirs. The feelings and emotions that they have belong to them. And anything that happens that they do, that they choose to do, is they're responsible for what they say, how they act, and how they react. And so am I. All those things about myself are what I'm responsible for. So in interacting with other people, it's important to keep those things in mind because otherwise, I'm just walking around trying to please everyone and make sure other people don't get angry at me, to try to keep the peace or try to keep conflict from happening because any of us survivors are afraid of conflict. Oh no, what's this person going to do? What's this person going to feel? And we need to allow each other to have all of those things, like emotions and thoughts and feelings. And it's especially hard when the negative feelings arise. Like if somebody gets angry at us or if we get angry at someone else, those things are triggery and scary for survivors. Now, you put more than one survivor together and you have a recipe for people being triggered, people misunderstanding. But like I said, in every relationship, each person is responsible for what they say and what they do. Now, we all have feelings and we have no control over what we think and feel, but we do have control over what we say and how we respond and in how we react to the other person. Sometimes emotions come and we are responsible for dealing with them. In no way did the other person make us feel something because it is our own responsibility and the feelings are on us. As far as, yeah, maybe somebody triggered us and maybe they even knew that this is something that triggers us, but they didn't think about it, and we can't walk around walking on eggshells, making sure we never trigger anybody, or we always hold back how we feel or what we choose to do because of what it will do to someone else. We can be careful, we can be compassionate, we can be aware of different things and in hopes of being kind and gentle and loving towards people. We can do the best that we can. But the bottom line is people are going to get triggered. I'm going to get triggered. With any survivors that are hearing this podcast, there's going to be times that you are triggered, no matter what you do and no matter what the other person tries to do. A perfect example was when my husband was caring for me after I had a knee replacement, and he was trying so hard to keep from triggering me and being in a in a condition where I was feeling a lot of physical pain and things were triggering me from my past just because of the pain involved, the physical pain and medical procedures and stuff. But he was trying so hard to keep from triggering me that it actually made things worse. And there is no way that a person can prevent another person from being triggered. It just is not reality and it's not possible. And so if I say, well, you made me feel this because you did that, I need to own my responses, even though I don't always have complete control. Like, for instance, if I go into fight, flight, freeze, I might, like shriek out, like, ah, or whatever the response is, because that's like a survival mechanism where we don't always have control over our reaction, like a PTSD response. But so then we can say, "Oh, I'm sorry." Like if we're in a room full of people and we do that and we're disrupting um, a group or a few people are with us, we can just excuse ourselves and do what we need to do to give ourselves self care. But if I start coming at someone, then after I've done what I need to do, that's the thing, is being able to do what I need to do to take care of myself. Or, like when you're triggered, doing some grounding technique or taking a time out and walking into another room or whatever you need to do. Then after that, I can respond in a more loving way. So in those cases, I can say something like, well, I need to take a break. I got triggered. And then I'm responsible for taking care of myself. I'm also responsible and able to then keep from responding or reacting in a way that could be harmful to someone else. And so I was reading someone's message in a group recently where they were talking about how a lot of the things that we have happen that are negative in relationships or in our lives is caused by unresolved conflicts and the trauma that we have had as a child. So when something happens that reminds us of our past, where we might have some difficult emotions come up and our behavior and attitude towards someone is kind of like we're seeing it from our filter of that past hurt. and from our repressed history, we need to, as much as possible, protect ourselves from transferring this unresolved material that we really need to deal with onto others. And then we can take responsibility for our own emotions as we work through the past wounds that got triggered and responsibility take the responsibility off of that other person, knowing that this is coming from something that was activated from our past. And I think it really helps when we can try to see other people as wounded people walking around also, because underneath something that's triggering them, that may have caused how they responded to us in the first place. And so it's kind of like doing a dance in a way, but it's different than walking on eggshells. It's looking at the perspective of the other person and kind of putting yourself in their shoes and in your own dialectically, like at the same time. Now, that doesn't mean that you totally take on everything or you totally put everything onto the other person. It's about finding that balance that I was talking about at the beginning. And that's what this podcast is about, is finding the balance between us and other people in relationships, but also to look at the fact that as survivors of abuse, we are going to have effects and be affected by our abuse, probably for the remainder of our lives. And so learning to balance all of that with every situation that comes up, we're able to see our ways through it a lot better without blaming others for everything and without blaming ourselves for everything. Being alive means that in life, there are conflicts. In life, there are challenges and trials that we go through. And how we respond to each thing that happens in our lives, whether it's a circumstance with having something taken away or having to pay more money for something, or the things that can happen in relationships where you really need to talk things through. And I think that's the biggest takeaway today, is to talk things through with your parts so that they can all be heard, but also then doing that in relationships where if that person is willing to talk things through, you can hear them, they can hear you. And even if the person says, I feel angry because of something that happened, being able to hear someone all the way through, um, but not necessarily allowing them to yell at you and, like disrespect you, but saying, I hear you, I care about you, but then also telling yourself, I care about me too, because as a survivor, I matter. And so do all of you who are survivors and people that are helping survivors and supporting survivors. We are all important and we all matter. I believe that all lives matter. And so it's about finding that balance where everyone can feel like their life matters and that they're heard and seen and accepted and known and loved. And sometimes relationships break down or have ruptures. And I believe that the way that relationships heal when there are things that come up that could be permanent ruptures is that if we treat that other person and ourselves during the process as human beings who have and who make mistakes and who have times where we both will hurt people, not intentionally, but out of our frustration or feelings or anger about something. We can say things that are hurtful, or other people can as well. And so, talking about those things in safe spaces and allowing each person to be human, I think is a beautiful expression and a beautiful way to take abuse, which is a horrible thing that has that happens to way too many people, and it's a way to turn things around for good. I believe that God takes beauty, he makes beauty out of ashes, and he takes sometimes the most harmful, hurtful things that can happen to a human being, and he turns them around to for the person's good, but also for the good of others. And the way that God has done that in my life is by helping me to learn these things and then helping others to learn different ways. Because we might say, well, that was a bad way for that person to respond. But when there's abuse involved, there was no learning healthy, good ways of interacting. So if we say that was a bad thing that they did or a horrible thing that they did, when they're, especially when they're a survivor trying to heal and they need healing from what's happened to them, they really just need to learn different ways and learning tools that can be helpful, like effective communication, learning to say, I feel this way, instead of saying, you did that, and I feel like you made me feel blah, blah, blah. So there's ways of interacting with people that are different and finding that balance and our identity. Because when we know who we are, we can better respond to other people who are learning who they are. And when there's DID, there's a lot of people involved. So when I talk about two people in a relationship, just think of this. When there are two people or multiple people that have multiple people identities with DID, it can get very complicated, but it can also be such a beautiful thing to interact with people that really do have a lot of compassion and have been hurt very badly. To see them interact with each other in different ways, finding their way through life, having the recovery that they all deserve. And I have seen this in multiple groups um, where survivors are learning how to thrive, which is what this podcast is all about, learning how to thrive instead of just survive. And I think in learning how to find that balance, that is how we learn to thrive. I want to thank you for listening today. And I hope and pray that you can find balance and more of yourself. I came up with a quote recently that I feel is relevant during this time where I'm learning how to have relationships that are healthier and how to not lose myself. And I hope this is helpful to you. I wrote it down somewhere. Let me see if I can find it so I say it. Um, okay, so if I have to lose me to have a relationship with you, I choose me. And that might sound selfish, but here's the thing. I had to lose me during my abuse, and you probably did too. So, in having relationships with other people, we have to find our me and then love ourselves, learn how to love ourselves. Sometimes it's accepting or even just putting up with ourselves. But if we're in a relationship and we lose our me completely again, over and over again, we're only just giving ourselves up to be in a relationship with someone. And by having our own me and the other person having their me, then you can have a relationship that's based on mutual love and acceptance and respect and having boundaries and interacting in ways that are healthier or healthy as we can possibly have, then we don't lose our me and that person doesn't lose their me either. So I think it's a great thing to strive for. And I really think that I want to become more than even a thriver. I want to be a surthriver that strives for as excellent as a life as I can possibly have. And I encourage all of you to do the same, to find the balance, to allow God to heal you from your abuse, but also to heal relationships because God created us for relationship with him and relationship with other people, but we can't have relationships with other people if we don't even have a relationship with ourselves. There's a Bible verse that says love your neighbor as yourself. We can't love anyone well if we are running around with self-hatred and hating ourselves, taking all the blame on for our abuse. And it's so beautiful when you accept yourself and love yourself, but it takes time. And then out of the love that you feel from God, which I feel so loved and so like I'm an adopted daughter of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So I guess what I want to leave you with is this. You are important and you can learn to balance your life in all of your relationships, choosing healthier people to be around if you're in toxic relationships, and the ones that are worth having in your life. You can learn different ways to interact so that they can be them and you can be you and can be me, and that there's a separation between us, but in giving each other permission to be ourselves, we can then, when we relate and connect to each other, that there's just so much more freedom in that relationship. And I know that God is all about freedom. Jesus came to set the captives free and to heal the brokenhearted. So there's freedom in Jesus, and there's freedom when we allow ourselves to have healing and allow other people to have healing. And then when we come together in relationship, there's still that separateness, but there's that closeness that doesn't come unless we open our hearts and that other person opens their heart to us. And there's safety and trust. And it's just beautiful. It so makes up for the abuse that was done. Relationships harm when it comes to abuse, but relationship is what heals when it comes to recovery. Thank you so much for listening. This is Sharri, and I would just like to say, just like all of the podcasts that I do, it is time to arise and shine after abuse.